Well, hello there guys, and welcome to another video. The past couple of days have been pretty overwhelming for the channel, is one way to put it, but hoping to roll straight back into regular stuff for you guys. So one specific thing about this week, interestingly enough, is that there was no elite specialization, and nobody's sad about that fact. In fact, I'm sure someone's sad, someone out there. Oh no, I wanted my Forge and my Druid. Don't forget, we've got the Beta Weekend Event 2 to look forward to this coming weekend. And ArenaNet did just announce a whole bunch of stuff to do with the raids. Well, kind of, and which is what we'll be discussing in this video. And they also specifically, of course, released free-to-play, which has been largely dominating Guild Wars 2 news circuit. And there have been a lot of posts about that kind of stuff. However, there have been a few interesting little things going on that I did want to touch on with you guys. And specifically for me, today was the first day I did a stream, a proper stream. And I'm going to play around with a little something here. We did a big discussion on raids in that stream. And I aired a few opinions that I haven't aired on the channel yet on a couple of topics which we'll cap this news video off with. So, before we get into that stuff, let's talk about a few other things. So, do you remember the main website I showed you guys where we had all of the 9 professions stood shoulder to shoulder in their elite specialization form, and each individual one was its own little cutouts? Well, someone went into the files, I guess looked at the page source perhaps, and actually pulled out that specific image that you can see here on the screen. So this is the Druid. Now, there's not too much we can say about her. We obviously already knew that she was going to be wielding a staff. So the weapon itself doesn't tell us anything, and even the name we already knew. You know, for those reasons, it would seem weird then that ArenaNet leave this to be one of the last to be announced, but maybe it was just an elite specialization that took a lot of tuning, and I'll talk about that specifically when they do announce it. Maybe it's got something to do with the pets. And specifically, that's the one thing a lot of people have mentioned. The old art from this image did include the Ranger's pet with them, but the Druid does not. So what could that mean? I think that the Druid will still have a pet. I know that it makes a lot of sense to make an elite specialization without a pet, because that is what so many Rangers want. You know, if you think about, like, what existing members of that profession desperately want, sometimes it's really easy to know what they want. Like, engineers want more variety in the weapons that they could wield. Elite specialization addresses that, you know, very handily, very easily. They gave them a 2-handed weapon, probably for a very good reason, maybe that reason. But, so for the Ranger, the really big one is a lot of people want to play a Ranger like Aragorn, okay? They want to be the greatsword-wielding Ranger that doesn't have to rely on animal companionry, if that's a word. But ArenaNet have always said, you know, that is supposed to be what being a Ranger is. With an elite specialization, being a Ranger can mean something different. You know, there's a huge swap between the Guardian and the Dragon Hunters, so why couldn't we see one here? However, mechanically, because of stuff like Beast Mastery, it just seems unlikely to me that we're gonna see a pet be removed from this class. If anything, I can imagine an elite specialization augmenting that pet more. You know, we're getting a new expansion here, we could be getting more pets, but we'll do a bit more discussion on that later. What's really just interesting is that this thing was pulled out of the site. Funnily enough, the Forge was not really capable of being pulled from the site. So does that mean somehow that the Druid is a more complete elite specialization and they're prepared to show it to us quicker? A part of me, a good 50% of me, and that's as much percent of me there can be, really does believe that the Druid will be the last, just because it was the first announced. But we'll see. Moving on beyond the free-to-play stuff and the Druid leak, before we get to raids, I want to talk about NCSoft and ArenaNet's relationship. So there's some rumors about these two quite recently. Those rumors being that they had split, and ArenaNet was now completely independent and had no publisher. Why did people believe these rumors? Well, because we logged into the game one day, were asked to sign a new end-user license agreement, and all references to NCSoft had been removed from the end-user license agreement. And why would they do that if they were still connected to NCSoft? A lot of people really like jumping to that. I think in general gaming culture, we see a developer-publisher relationship as a negative thing. It's easy to forget that without the publisher, the game would never have existed in the first place, and it's also easy to forget that some publishers can do very beneficial things for their games. We tend to think of these, oh, so much more common it would seem scenarios in which the publishers have, tight grips over companies, destroy companies, outright shut down companies. NCSoft themselves, even some people are a little bit bitter because of City of Heroes and City of Villains, which was shut down a while ago. And the thought that ArenaNet's out on their own, that's a good thing. It means that ArenaNet can completely stick 100% to their philosophies. No more money grubbing from NCSoft, no more forced gem store stuff, no more releasing expansions and products before they're ready. The truth is, we really don't know the way that their relationship works. I believe that one of the 3 founders of ArenaNet did ultimately go on to work at NCSoft West. NCSoft West specifically, I believe, are the publishing company for ArenaNet. It's not the same as, just regular NCSoft, which are more Asian-based. But one of these guys does enjoy a very high position, or did, at NCSoft, and it's always been perhaps possible that because of this, ArenaNet has enjoyed a very good relationship with NCSoft. As a content creator for Guild Wars 2, I do get to interact with employees of NCSoft who work specifically around ArenaNet and Guild Wars 2 based stuff. And overall, my impression of it has always been, on a personal level and just as, trying to objectively look at the way that things have been handled, a really amicable relationship between the two. But hey, who knows what goes on behind closed doors. Anyway, why am I talking so much about their relationship? Well, because Massively OP did ask in an interview, hey, have you split up? So this came out, there'll be a link in the description. PAX Prime 2015, Guild Wars 2's free-to-play model and publishing takeover. Didn't give us much information at all, and this is where I think a lot of confusion still lies. So down here, it was asked, since we were talking about the business model of free-to-play above, I also asked about the rumors floating around regarding the change in the end-user license agreement. If you look closely, you might notice that all mentions of NCSoft have mysteriously disappeared. So Mike O'Brien, the company head, shrugged the question off and said, there's nothing tricky about that. ArenaNet is taking over the publishing of Guild Wars 2. At that point, Joe Hansen jumped in to comment on another Reddit conspiracy, confirming that ArenaNet does in fact have a base on the moon, and that all of ArenaNet's employees will be relocating there with him. Curious. So what exactly does this mean? Does this mean no more NCSoft? Well, no, I haven't heard anything on my end. I'm still interacting with people from NCSoft, and people from NCSoft are still interacting with ArenaNet. I think the truth is that NCSoft still own ArenaNet, whatever that means. It just means, I guess, that the responsibilities performed by one company as opposed to another are different. And so now that ArenaNet publishes Guild Wars 2, what does that mean? That they are more to do with the marketing side of things? They're the ones scoring deals with physical box providers and stuff like that? I can't pretend to know that much about general gaming and the way that the industry works. Perhaps you guys can have some interesting comments of your own, but this absolutely is not settled. There's still a lot of confusion about what's going on here. I guess you can look at it as, hey, ArenaNet has more freedom, so this is good, but always look at the other side of the coin. The other side of the coin is that ArenaNet are being forced or trying to take on responsibilities like the more publishing duties that they cannot handle, and this could impact us negatively. I've heard speculation that that free-to-play only exists because of this, and a wide variety of things, but until we get something more than just a sudden offhanded shrug from Mike O'Brien, I think what exactly is going on is still a little up in the air. We should be a bit skeptical. Anyway, interesting topic. The next little bit of news comes in the way of Gail Gray on the forums, who's been talking about this supposed event that might appear in-game before Heart of Thorns releases. Remember that data mining from that shaman? Something mysterious is happening in a couple of the 15 to 30 maps, such as Kessex Hills, Brisbane Wildlands, and so forth. Well, a post came out today in which Gale says, as you're aware, we have a lot of new players joining Guild Wars 2 these days, but you may not know is that in addition to preparing our presentation about raids and our Play for Free initiative, and even while working towards the October 23rd release date, the dev team also has been working on a game event. We'll have more information for you soon, but for now, let's just say there's never been a better time to get in a guild. So, they're pushing a big thing for people to get into guilds. I'm sure it's going to have something to do with these maps. I'll keep you guys posted as more information comes out. Moving on, we've got some information about raids. Oh, very good. So, I've already explained to you guys that I'm a little unhappy with what was presented at the stage at PAX. They talked about a few things. They gave us a trailer. They explained, yeah, we're going for raids. But they didn't say the important stuff. They didn't give us real details. Why is that? Perhaps it's because this is being delivered to us at a huge convention, and they obviously wanted to grab as many members of the audience as possible. They didn't want to divulge specific information about core little mechanics and clarifications that, yes, enemies will have lots of boons, so the necromancers, yes, can now start boon stripping, and yes, there will be lots of conditions coming off, so the necros can now start converting those back. They didn't want to talk about that specific stuff for the veterans, just as they didn't want to talk about that stuff at PAX South, because, hey, it's not really the audience for it. The other side of the coin, again, though, is that maybe this stuff is just completely not final. And in the various interviews that have come out where they could have given us that deeper elaboration, I'm still not seeing too many examples of them going into that. And that worries me a little. It also, I think, is no surprise or no coincidence that raiding is the last thing they've announced. And do remember that for the good first 2 to 3 to 4 months after Heart of Thorns was announced, they were saying, yeah, these are all the features that we know are going to be in the expansion and we know we want to talk about. There are other features, they're just not final enough for us to bring to you guys' attention, right? So that was stuff like a lot of the guild hall systems, and you can basically look at any later reveal, not elite specializations, because they've been staggered for another reason, I think, but you can look at any later reveal or announcement, as these are the things that they were maybe at PAX South time not even sure if they were going to be in the game or how they were dealing with it. So there's probably a measure of uncertainty on there and still to do with raids. But here's a couple of clarifications that they did give us. First of all, and this was interesting to me, they said that the raids will, of course, have story components to them, and these raids will take place after, canonically, the expansion is complete. And that makes sense because, actually, they'll be released in real time after the expansion's complete too, and this fits in with their method of delivering us the living world, which is done in a very similar way. So it'll be the Heart of Thorns storyline, which comes to a logical conclusion. It was confirmed in an interview, by the way. Whether that means the defeat of Morgemoth or not, who knows? But it does come to a logical conclusion and ending. And then we have kind of the later stories. I look at this comment that the raids are going to be set after the expansion and kind of like a tertiary or a secondary story going on. I very much think of these as like a raw explorable mode. In many ways, raids that they're trying to implement now are what dungeons they were trying to implement at the launch of the game, and obviously fell completely short of hitting the mark there. So I don't think it's too unfair to look at a raw explorable, their kind of ultimate dungeon at the end, the dungeon with the longest path that they designed, where they wanted the most intricate dynamics and difficulty, and the story there, oh look, was the same situation. It took place after the events of the personal story, but it was still relevant in some way. And in some ways, in massive ways. There are things revealed to us in a raw story that mean huge things for Heart of Thorns, like the ability to cleanse people of dragon corruption. A huge theme of this entire expansion is Sylvari succumbing to dragon corruption. We've even heard that the player character could, in theory, fall to it. So, and they could even do that as a story as long as, you know, this stuff with the Orien Risen Chicken ends up being a thing. So, I'm getting a little bit sidetracked, but yeah, they confirmed the raid stories will take the same kind of idea there. It was further confirmed that there's not going to be like, if you are a World of Warcraft player, and if you're listening to me and you've just started playing free-to-play, there's a good chance you might have played it at some point, there's not going to be a standard looking for raid tool ever in Guild Wars 2. Instead, we're going to stick with LFG. And I'm actually really happy to hear this. Some people will like the convenience of looking for raid, but I'm a firm believer that there are features you can throw into a game for convenience that strip away important things, like that of having a strong community and like keeping toxicity down. So simply by doing this, what they're basically doing is they're still giving you a way to group up together through LFG, but it won't automatically all throw you together from across everywhere in the whole world and dump you in the instance with no communication, and then off you're expected to go, and people end up getting angry at each other for running the wrong builds and all that kind of stuff. They're just going to do the same system as LFG. You have to manually move to the dungeon, and that's fine in a game like Guild Wars 2 with so many waypoints anyway. And lastly is a topic with a little confusion around it, but to do with build locking, or what we'll be able to swap while we're in the instances. Now, I've explained before that I'm an advocate of this, and I'll have a bit of a discussion on that in a second. But the Arena Network asked this, and they were quoted as having said, yeah, you'll be in combat the whole time. That's not true. You won't be in combat the whole time. So we had an interesting thing here where a lot of people rebelled against that idea. They really didn't like the sound of it. I can understand why people really wouldn't like the sound of it. I think we associated being in combat as being sluggish and slow, especially if you're a PvE player. If you're a PvP player, you probably understand much better how this could impact the game. But a lot of people expressed a dislike in this idea. And Colin came along to clarify that, in fact, you're not constantly in combat. It's just while you're in an encounter. So, like, while you're fighting a powerful boss or you're doing something very specific in that dungeon, there's no way in raids to walk to the edge of the encounter, break combat, heal up, and swap a ton of stuff on it and come back in. This is already something we basically see anyway in the game with stuff like the My Trin fight and some of the more recent things they've done through the living world. So this isn't anything super new, actually. And then at that point, with the clarification, a lot of other people came out of the woodwork and said, oh, I was actually looking forward to that. That sounded really interesting, damn it. So they're on a bit of a split wire here with who wants what precisely. And I just hope that ArenaNet give us more clarifications at some point. These are the things that they should have been talking to us about while they were up there on stage, not just throwing around buzzwords and notions that we've been listening to back when they released the Manifesto trailer, all right? We've all heard it before about the idea of waiting for a dedicated healer. So I'm going to cap this video off, guys, with a little portion of the stream in which I talked a bit about raiding too, and I talked about specifically a couple of topics. The idea was mentioned that raiding would take about an hour or two, but Colin didn't really have much of an idea there. He said depending on your skill level and the comp you use, it could have a wildly varying amount of time to complete, and that didn't give me too much confidence. But there were 3 specific topics on the stream which I was talking about. Number 1, I was talking about the importance of this stuff being difficult, and the idea of it being difficult meaning that it has to be aimed at the top 5% of players. Okay, the idea that it has to be exclusionary, all right? I was talking about that. I was talking about the idea of being kicked out of the dungeons and there being some risk and hoping that this will basically be in the game. And also, I was talking about the idea, should people be able to run a huge variety of different comps and builds and stuff in the raids, or should it be so difficult only a couple can make it through the content? So those were the 3 big topics. These are the things I want clarifications from ArenaNet about. These are the things we all have different opinions on, and hopefully you guys enjoy what I had to say back there earlier. I don't know whether in these videos in the future I'll throw up stream clips. The audio quality for this one's going to be a bit lower, but it won't be like that for future stream things, so please do bear with me on that. But you guys will have to let me know if this is something you like or not, because I'm totally new to streaming. I'm totally new to combining streaming with YouTube, as you saw in the channel update, and I'm open to changing stuff, so feedback on that would be brilliant. But enjoy, guys. A little bit of discussion about raids. I'll catch you tomorrow. Raiding in a lot of games has always been for the top 5%. Do you see a lot of people getting in there? This is a good question. We don't want to try and exclude anybody. Raiding in Guild Wars 1 with the Underworld and Fissure Woe were Guild Wars 1's take on that kind of content. Domain of Anguish, all those were the same content we're using for Guild Wars 2. They're extremely popular in Guild Wars 1. I'd be surprised if they weren't as popular here. Accessibility is awesome. I just don't want to see like everyone finishing it without failure in between. Do you know what I mean? Like the whole point of this, someone left a message like, I can't believe Wooden Potatoes wants these to be difficult, and I you know, for the top few % of people to be able to do them, and suggesting it's something to do with ego. You know, like it's so that you can wank yourself off because you did so much better than everyone else. It's not anything to do with that. The point is that unless it is, frankly, because I play the game so much, okay, because I'm approaching 8,000 hours in the game, because I look so much into the game, I know a lot about it, and so it's going to take something quite challenging for me to fail a bunch at it and have that beautiful, delicious experience of trying and trying and trying and being fascinated by how hard something is, to obsess over it and think about it, and then finally climb that hill and defeat it. It's going to have to be challenging, and so to challenge me, as I am already in that 5% or whatever, I want that content to be aimed at me, the veteran player, the person that's been doing for it. I don't want them to aim it to be accessible. I don't want them to make it so that anyone can run any build and just hang out in there because the game's about being super accessible. That isn't what this content is supposed to be. So that's where the exclusion comes in. It's nothing to do with ego. It's just specifically because they cannot provide that experience of fascination, and that goes for content creation too. That goes for people who want to stream those raids on Twitch. That goes for us as people who want to watch them. You know, like you'll be able to come to Twitch, you'll be able to go on, click Guild Wars 2 or look at any of your Guild Wars 2 subscribers and be excited to see in your sub box or someone live try further in a raid that you've ever seen before, because no one else can do it. You need that exclusivity to be there for this to be really content and to truly shine. And so that's the crux of the matter. And I would absolutely say, people who are trying to participate in the discussion about raids, if you don't like the idea of it being difficult, and if you don't like that feeling of failing over and over and over, and yes, feeling frustration, right, and having the low before the high, if that doesn't appeal to you, then I would say this content should never appeal to you, and you shouldn't be asking to change it. What you should be doing is looking at dungeons, which are and basically everything else Guild Wars 2 offers. You know, like Heart of Thorns is going to have a lot of stuff when it comes out, and most of it's catering to that. So yeah, that's kind of my discussion on it. We're not setting time expectations. Basically, our goal is to have you go in, and the first time you're going to get absolutely smacked. You should come out of it saying, what are we going to do to change our builds, and what are we going to do to change our tactics? When you do beat it, we want you to just barely be able to clear and move on. So here's the important thing about build locking, guys, or failure and risk. And it's something that they haven't clarified, and this is something that I still want them to talk about on the stream. Listen to what he just said here. Our goal is to have you go in, and the first time you're going to get smacked, you should come out of it saying, what are we going to do to change our builds, and what are we going to do to change our tactics? You should come out of it. All right, that's the important thing. They're envisaging this as something that you go in and you can't do it. Like, currently, with the way that Guild Wars 2 set up, with it, the freedom of swapping characters, with the freedom of constantly swapping your builds and all that good stuff, you don't come out of it. You go into the raid, you beat the first boss, and it's really hard or whatever. You come to another challenge, and then you just swap your characters in and out until eventually you have the perfect comp to counter it. And then you do that, and then you grind forward a bit more, and you grind forward, and you grind forward, and you leave the dungeon to repair your armor, which is now a non-mechanic armor breaking. You wait for your death penalty to run out. There is nothing that attritively grinds you down until you have to leave, which was a very big mechanic in Guild Wars 1. Of course, a full wipe, you get kicked out. And like a continuous wiping over and over and over, your death penalty stacked up. Eventually, that allowed you to augment that, of course, through consumables, which was very controversial at the time, I'd like to say. So, like, that's an element. Why does he think we're going to come out of it saying that? Why isn't this going to be something? And what you have to understand, those systems are in place because there's a difference between failing at something and being forced out by the game and then having that moment to stop and refresh and go again. There's a difference between that and what we tend to do as gamers, a lot of people will tend to do, as having a really bad time and really struggling and just wanting it to be over, but it's not over, and so you just keep going, you grind and you fail ad infinitum, and you end up hating the experience. And that happens a lot too, and that's why those systems are supposed to be in place to kick you out, to force you out. And we've had no word of that. So why does Colin word it this way? Your warrior can bust out the banners or shouts, your guardian can have its aegis, and so on. It just seems so wishy-washy. You know, it just seems so... we really don't have a good idea of what people are doing. This is one of those things. It's like when I did that video a while ago where I talked about how I'd like to improve dungeons, and I talked about like the skull idea and the gambit idea, specifically about shaking up the way that we play, reducing the strength of those things that are strong, incentivizing things that currently are weak, all that stuff. One of the main criticisms that came to me from that was, you know, you have these ideas, but like they're just not specific enough. I tried to be as specific as I could, and this is not specific. You know, you can't just say, oh, you can have a warrior with banners if you want. What do you mean? People will have warriors with banners if that's still, you know, the best way to augment their damage. Also, for what it's worth, there is another discussion here about, are we going to be in a situation where builds are strictly enforced on people, because to run any other comp, to deviate from the perfect builds, means failure. And there's people saying, you know, we don't want that. We want a big variety in the builds that we run. I would argue if you go for the big variety in the builds that we run, then the perfect builds are going to be really, really good, and they're just going to destroy the content. Like, they're going to make it too easy, and that's not going to be balanced properly. So, I would also argue that even the current implementation of dungeons is what you're asking for. The current implementation of dungeons is, if you want, you can kill friggin' the Spider Queen in AC on a pure Nomad's Ellie. We've seen it done. Or attacking a war. It just takes ages and it's slow. But dungeons are in that situation where you can run whatever you want. And to fit that point where you can run whatever you want, what did they have to do, guys? They had to make them ridiculously easy. And because they're ridiculously easy, why would people want to play them? Oh, well, we'll have to put a lot of gold on them. So that's what that's the development of dungeons there. That's exactly what happened. And so now there are things that you run very quickly, and you get a high amount of gold. People generally aren't interested in them. There's a very small community of people out there who are interested in doing them fast, but in general, because they're done so fast anyway, and people don't care too much about a couple of seconds, and the tactics are so refined, even that scene isn't particularly booming. So to say, oh, I want to be able to go in there on, you know, a whole ton of different builds, I think is wrong for raids. I think that you're going to have the top one, and they need to balance for what the top ones end up being, and that needs to be the challenging, and that needs to be the difficult thing. And yes, there can be some deviations. We don't have to talk in such extremes. You know, like when I was talking about build lock-in, there was a lot of that too. People were like, oh, you're just going to have the same comp everywhere. I think a lot of people really underestimate as well how different a wing can feel, or each raid can feel, just based on the content that is inside it, you know? Even in the situation that there is one comp to rule them all, and everything's balanced around that comp, and deviating from it makes things really hard, which is a razor-thin idea, and is never going to happen. There's always going to be deviations. People are going to optimize in different ways, and there should be different ideas for, you know, if you have a comp that's very good at getting through a boss that has to be condied, then maybe you'll have some people push more comedy into their comp, then other people will put comedy into their comp. There's also a question of, currently in dungeons we see this, you can do stuff really fast if you're very good, or you can do stuff really slow on like easy builds. Like, and that will be an element for raids as well. But anyway, my point with the build locking thing is people are saying like there's some ultimate comp, this is going to force everything to be the same. Even if we were all running the same comp, if ArenaNet predefined the builds we ran in these raids, they're not necessarily going to get boring as long as the builds that are being used in there have interesting synergies between them, emergent gameplay can come out, stuff you didn't expect just because it's inherent to the combat system, and specific stuff that the devs design as well. One raid that comes out or one wing that comes out is going to have a boss that nukes us and we all have to fly away. That's not a precise experience we're going to get every wing of every raid that we play. So, you know, I think there's absolutely enough to keep fresh, and I think concerns like that are a little overblown. I think it's interesting, this discussion, because I think, imagine this world, guys. Imagine a world, alright, and I'm not saying I want to live in this world, but imagine a world in which no information about Heart of Thorns is delivered whatsoever about the game before it comes out, alright? And then all on the same day, they give us everything. They tell us, and you know, magically, people have got the time to read it all and digest it all perfectly. So it's an impossible universe, right? An impossible world. But imagine that all on that one day, they give us absolutely everything. We just heard about adventures. We just heard about the 3 biomes. We just heard about every elite specialization. We just heard about the guild halls, the world versus world changes, everything. And raids are one of those things. I think in that world, when there's a ton of discussion about it, the only people that are in the raid discussion side of things are the ones that really want the content and really appreciate and value what that content is trying to be. And so what ArenaNet would get in that weird world is they'd get a lot of feedback from people who really value that content and probably aren't going to complain a lot about the idea of it being hard or the idea of it being exclusionary or any of those things. But because we live in this world where they release one feature a week or whatever, and the entire community is going to be focused on that one thing over that week, what you end up having is a ton of people, really, that I don't think raids are aimed at, but feel like they want to be a part of the discussion. Because it's easy to forget that there's a ton of other stuff in Heart of Thorns for them. Right now, we're talking about raids. And right now, raids don't appeal to them. The idea that they're going to have to fail a lot doesn't appeal to them. The idea that, really, if this is actually going to be difficult, it does have to be catered to a very small amount of comps that will work. You know? And these things they don't like the sound of, because that's what everyone's talking about this week. They're throwing their words out there. And I think people just have to really think about what is aimed at them. What is their demographic? And equally so as well, when ArenaNet don't listen to what you have to say, maybe, because it's just not what they're going for right now. That's the term they like to use. You don't hate them for that. Just, you know, have a think about, like, because you guys know me. There's so many things about this game. Look at what we're doing in this stream. I'm playing a character that basically does have build lock-in and has, like, all these ridiculous rules you see here. Is a permadeath character. All these, like, kind of silly things that super appealed to me as a gamer, but Guild Wars 2 is nothing about. Guild Wars 2 does not care about these kinds of things, and it does not want to be this kind of game. And so, you know, I'll talk about it on the channel, but I'm not going to be angry at ArenaNet for not adding them, you know? So yeah, that's the article, I guess. See, streaming's weird, because, like, that rant is what the video should have been on today. It's like, okay, so what do I do for that video now? Oh god, I'm being kicked from the instant area.